Hi there, you're listening to Lee from the Plump DJs, and this is the Liverpool Connection podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Liverpool Connection podcast. This is my music and football episodes where I bring on a musician to talk about football and music. Really can't wait to get stuck into this one. He, back in the day, was part of Streetlife DJs with Louis Gaston. But now he's got a new moniker and it's called Silvertooth, and it's absolutely kick-ass, if I don't mind saying so myself. He used to be resident at home with Paul Oakenfold, which I went to quite a few times. It was in London, Leicester Square, if I'm not mistaken.
Number one, Leicester Square, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm really chuffed to bring on Stewart Rowell to the podcast. He's a Millwall fan, the first Millwall fan on the podcast.
There's not many of us, to be honest.
Yeah, he might be the last one, but we'll have to see. But welcome, mate. It's really good to have you, and I can't wait to get stuck in.
Thanks,
do you want to talk footy first, or do you want to do music?
You choose, man. You're the host. You choose. You steer the ship.
Let's do football. Let's get the Millwall out the way. So obviously you're a London lad.
Yeah.
Why Millwall for you?
So my family are from South London, born and bred. My mum and dad lived in New Cross, stone's throw from the ground. The old den, their house was on Old Kent Road. The old den was, like 500 yards just up the road. And then my dad. So it's in the blood, really. My dad's been a Millwall sport all his life. It's in the family. He took me down there. I think the first time was probably 1974, 1975. So, and yeah, it's just been ground into me, really.
Not pummeled. Just.
I mean, yeah, there might have been a certain amount of pummeling at some point, yeah, but no, yeah, it's just been, growing up near the ground. I'm always a believer, support your local team, and that was my local team. So, yeah, for better or for worse, that's my team. I love them. I go down there. I was a season ticket holder for many years. I'm not now because we moved out of London, myself and my partner. We moved down to the coast, so I don't go as often as I used to, but I go when I can. But yeah, I used to be there every weekend for quite a lot of years.
It's crazy to think, because obviously I'm a Liverpool supporter, that we've played each other 7 times,
yeah.
in over 100 and something years. I was just looking at the stats. 1896 was our first game against Uslar. Obviously, you remember we're there.
I remember the last one because I was there. It was at our place in the FA Cup, and Milan Baroš got a hat trick.
Yeah, well, no, I think he scored twice, and then
did he get 2?
Salif Dio, who he's one of those that shouldn't have probably ever put on a Liverpool shirt.
I don't even remember him.
A lot of people don't, but he's been playing in the Legends games.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, he's not a legend, but fair play to him. He's doing these charity. But yeah, I remember that game as well. But yeah, I mean, we used to have some battles in the first division, and it wasn't a blowout either. It was either 1-0, 2-1. I remember those games because I used to go with my granddad. But yeah, so I do want to talk about Millwall because obviously they've had such a distinguished history, and also about the violence and everything. That was all I used to see was Millwall fans this, Millwall fans that. What's your take on that whole thing? Because is it still a stigma for your team?
I mean, it's a stigma for the club. It's a stigma that's never going to go. I mean, it's not just Millwall. There's a whole host of clubs that have got a certain stigma. And I won't go into any names. I mean, just to put this, I've never been part of it, I might add. It's not something that's interested me. But yeah, there's still an element of it that happens. And it's a stigma that will last forever. I don't think the club tried to change it, but I don't think they ever will. you know, and it is what it is, you know. It's been around a long time. I mean, it harks back to our rivalry with West Ham originally, because obviously Millwall originally used to be north of the river. Old Millwall is north of the river. There's like a horseshoe shape, which is the Isle of Dogs, and that's where Old Millwall was. And the rivalry started with West Ham because you had two sets of dockers. You had the West Ham dockers and the Millwall dockers, and Millwall eventually moved south to Bermondsey, South Bermondsey, and that's how that rivalry started against West Ham, and that's obviously our biggest rival. I mean, football violence obviously was huge in the 80s. When everybody started taking drugs and chilling out.
Yeah.
And things suddenly got a lot better and a lot more sort of relaxed.
Yeah, it's so weird how that happens.
Yeah.
You know, like you hear, you know, especially it was a bit different, like northwest. But I mean, in London, obviously, you know, the clubs that everyone goes to, you'd have West Ham fans, Millwall fans, Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea, all eat up, all eat up, and
maybe a few world leaders or politicians need to start taking some drugs.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, if they could go back and take the proper
right drugs,
the right drugs, then you know we might all be, you know, singing "Kumbaya," but that's so far, you know, removed. But yeah, it's so funny, like, you know, obviously watching movies like Green Street Hooligans, kind of Americanized it, you know, especially with Frodo playing one of the main character. You know, and also Football Factory was, you know, a lot of people. I like Football Factory. You know, it's just one of those where it's so far from what the reality was. You know, it just takes it someplace else. What's your thoughts on like movies like that?
They're a bit of fun. I mean, you know, there's a certain amount of realism to them, but they're obviously hammed up a little bit for the big screen. Football Factory. So I used to live in Sydenham, in South London, and my next door neighbour was Roland Manukian, who plays Zebedee in Football Factory. He's the little lad, and he was my next door neighbour. We lived next to each other for quite a few years. Big Millwall fan, so I used to see him down the ground all the time. But he used to say to me, one of the hardest things he's ever done is play the part of a Chelsea supporter. He was a Chelsea fan in Football Factory. I really enjoyed Football Factory. I thought it was a great film. Green Street, not so much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, you know, when Frodo's your main character, you know, it just, it made
the accent was hilarious.
Well, yeah, I mean, with Hunan, like he's a Geordie, and he sometimes doesn't even sound like a Geordie because he's, you know, been around, and then he's trying to do that fake Cockney accent, was absolutely terrible. You know, I'd rather just use your own voice because that sounds terrible. The Football Factory for me was a, you know, no pun intended, a good riot to watch. You know, I mean, Danny Dyer, you've got to laugh at him. Every other word's a swear word, and he is what he is. But you know, Zebedee, I thought played a great part. You know,
he really did, yeah.
Especially the scene in the pub with what's his name,
Frank Harper.
Having a go at him, and then just saying, "Hey, I'm just kidding." And then he's shitting his cacks. But yeah, I mean, they're supposed to do another one, aren't they?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, there's something in the pipeline.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me was just seeing the lads in the clobber.
Yeah,
that's what it was all about for me.
So that shot got North 80s Casuals Classics.
Yeah,
he's made himself a decent living out of those films, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. Yeah, defo. Well, I want to, you know, Millwall, you're only 4 points off the top four, which is pretty crazy. You know, I mean, we've
had a weird couple of years because Gary Rowett was in charge for a while, and we were sort of steady in the Championship, mid-table, occasionally sort of pushing towards playoffs. But then he departed. He decided he'd had enough for whatever reason, and we were dive bombing towards relegation zone, and they brought Neil Harris back in for his second period in charge. Obviously, he's a club legend, being an all-time top goal scorer. And bless him, you know, I love Neil Harris. He is a legend. But and he did well last season. He got us, you know, he went on a run, a 13-game run, unbeaten. and we were well clear, and finished in the top half, and it was all rosy, and everyone was thinking, great, next season. Millwall did their usual in the close season and didn't really bring in much investment, many new players, many new signings. That being said, he got off to a fairly decent start this season, and again, we had at one point earlier this year we were up sort of 7th or 8th, I think. Just a point or two off the playoffs. We've got a really good academy at Millwall. We're good at bringing youngsters through. We never keep them; they always end up going. We've just sold Roman Esse to Palace for 15.5 million, and he came through our academy. But Harris was, I don't know, he's a bit of a one-dimensional manager. He doesn't really have a plan B. He's a good man manager. He gets a lot out of what he's got, but he's not really a tactician, if I'm being brutally honest. It's a bit one-dimensional. And I think he walked, I don't know how many weeks ago it was. It was probably, I don't know, it must have been October, November time. He walked out of the job, or he left by mutual agreement. I think he had a big fallout with Steve Gallen, who's the chief executive. It was about a comment that he made about the fans, or some of the fans, an element of the fans. Because, Millwall fans, as you know, they're not shy in coming forwards. They say exactly what they feel, to his face, in front of him at the ground on a Saturday. They'll let him know. And, a lot of fans were thinking he wasn't really picking the right team, and he was picking his pals because he had pals that were playing underneath him that he'd worked with previously. With all this young talent, they weren't getting a game. Am I there?
There you are. Yeah, there you go.
I had a bit of a disconnect there. So it took them ages to appoint a new manager. But we've brought in Alex Neil, who's the ex-Norwich, Derby. He's been around a few places, but he's an established Championship manager. And he took Norwich into the Premiership, didn't he? He got promotion with Norwich. And everyone was, I don't know if this is the right move or not. Is it ambitious enough? I really fancied having Mark Robbins, ex-Coventry, because he did a really good job at Coventry. Anyway, we got Alex Neil. Everyone was a bit sceptical, a bit dubious. Didn't get off to a great start, but he seems to have turned it round, and we've won the last 3 on the bounce. He's had a couple of draws, 1-3 on the bounce. And Millwall have just, I don't really recognise my club. We've just had the most unbelievable transfer window, January window. We've signed 8 players, all young talent. They're not names that you would know. But when they get announced, people are going, "Oh, this lad's brilliant!" And like the team that he's come from, they're going, "Oh, you've got a cracker here." So we're buzzing. We're like, "Wow, we've never had a window like it." I think a lot of it was to do because we sold Esse to Palace for 15 mil, so there was a few quid in the kitty, So because we're not, we're a small club. Reality is we're a small club with a big reputation. We haven't got much money. Our average home gate's probably about 13 or 14,000. You can't operate on big budgets under that kind of average gate. We've got a really good chairman. So it's a family-owned club. We're owned by the Berylson family from America, who are Americans, but they're not like the Glazers or the Henrys or the Abramoviches. They don't plough millions or billions into it. It's not like that. They run it as a business. They run it well. Mr. Berylson Senior, unfortunately died at the beginning of last year in a freak accident. And he'd been our chairman for a good 10 years, and fans loved him. He runs the club well as a business. He's passionate. He's American, but he's passionate about football, passionate about the club, loves the fans, loves the area. Was always coming over to watch us. Freak accident, he died, and everyone was really upset. But his son has taken over taken over charge as the chairman. And to be fair to him, he's doing a really good job. He's running the club well. He's investing. like I say, we've just signed a load of new players. We've won 3 on the bounce, and as you say, we're 4 points off of playoffs. And I think as a Millwall fan, you know, you can't really expect or want that much more of a club of that size. You know, I mean, I'd love to see us challenge in the playoffs and, you know, push for promotion. But the reality is, if we did get promotion, how would that play? I mean, God knows, you know.
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, the Championship is a really good, strong league. It really is. You know, it's tough. But you can notice the difference. I mean, you know, Ipswich and Southampton are just dross this season. You know, they're going straight back down.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, and it's been happening a lot in the last few years. Is
Really is, yeah.
You know, maybe one will stay up, but two will. They're just not Premier League quality. That's the thing.
These are clubs that have got average gates of sort of 30, 35,000, you know, and they've got big budgets, and they're still not able to make it stick. So, you know, there are exceptions. Look at Bournemouth. Bournemouth are a small club, small, but, you know, and then so there are exceptions to the rule, but I don't know. It would be nice to have a run in the top flight again. You know, we did it for 2 seasons in 88, 89, then 89 and 90. And in fact, our first season in the top flight, 88, 89, we were top for a couple of weeks. And it didn't last. We ended up sort of in the bottom half, and then the following season we went back down. But yeah, we had all the big clubs coming down to the Den for a season, and it was great. You know, we had Sheringham, Cascarino, Terry Hurlock. Those were the great days of you know, supporting them with big crowds.
You can make a plaque. You know, we were top for a few weeks. There we go.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I mean it'd be good. You know, I mean I'm not like I've actually followed Millwall, but you know I'm curious about learning more of the history. I mean, not only am I a Liverpool supporter, I'm a football supporter.
Same.
And you know, I don't just watch Liverpool games. You know, I watch as much footy as I can. You know,
Yeah, me too.
Having 4 girls, it's tough. You know, to watch the footy, I've got to be, you know, shoved in my office, and I watch it on the laptop. You know, because they want to watch cartoons. So you know, they rule over the house. But yeah, I'm a football supporter, and that's what it's about. So
in fact, I've got to tell you that. So as a kid growing up, so you know, I'm you know, I'm in my 50s. So you know, growing up playing football in the 70s and 80s, I'm a tall lad. I used to play centre half. My during that period, the team were obviously Liverpool. You know, late 70s and into the 80s, Liverpool were the team. The Bob Paisley era, whatever. My favourite. So away from Millwall, obviously that's in my blood. Away from Millwall, Kenny Dalglish, Alan Hansen were my idols, purely because of the quality of, you know, the pair of them. I was a centre half and I played Alan Hansen, one of the best centre halves ever played in England, without a doubt. Dalglish, legend. You know, you couldn't help. You know, I didn't support them, but I loved the club, and I loved I just loved watching them because they were, you know, and that carried on for many years. You know, into the Gerrard and the Fowler years, and what have you. But yeah, so I've got there is a special place in my heart for Liverpool, for the football club. Yeah,
I like that, and I'll clip that.
yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, I think with Kenny and with Hansen, not only on the pitch, they were gentlemen off the pitch as well.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, obviously, you know what they went through with Hillsborough, and you know it was tough to watch. But you know, Kenny's Liverpool through and through. You know,
Yeah, what a player, man. Oh.
yeah. Well, I mean, like my childhood hero was Keegan. Just for a year. I mean, I was 6 years old, and that's when my granddad took me to my first match. So I fell in love, like, you know, watching Keegan play because he was just all over the pitch. And when he left, I was devastated. But
How many
then,
years was he at Liverpool?
about 6 or 7.
Oh, right. It was
Yeah,
period.
yeah. But then he went on, you know, to Hamburg and won the Ballon twice. So fair play to him. But you know, as a child, you just think, "Oh, your life's ruined now that your hero's gone." And then who comes in? King Kenny, you know. So it was a quick turnaround. I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, no more crying, no more, you know, ripping posters of Kevin Keegan. I've got King Kenny on the wall." But yeah, I mean, Liverpool have just been class. You know, the soonest years weren't that good. But you know,
No.
as you know now, you know, Klopp left 9 years of just winning everything you possibly can, and probably would have won more if it wasn't for City and City doing City things. You know,
Yeah.
what's see for me, what they do off the pitch, you know, is wrong. But what they do on the pitch, when you watch them play football, it's magical. It really is. You know,
Yeah.
maybe not this season, but for the past 4 or 5 seasons, you've got to appreciate the football that's been played. You know, even the 115 charges, that's off the pitch. That's an issue that I massively have. But when you watch, again, I'm a football fan, and you watch teams like this, and Real Madrid play fantastic football, you can only just like applaud it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm sure people are saying the same thing about Liverpool as well. You know, I don't like, you know, how they do this or that, but then when you watch them play, you're just like, wow, that's some football team.
Yeah, and there seems to be a calmness about the place as well. You know,
Mhm.
Klopp, love him or hate him, and I was a fan. I really liked him, but there was a certain amount of chaos around Jurgen Klopp, even though, you know, because that was his character, and I
Yeah,
think I think that sort of showed on the pitch as well. Your man that's there now, he's a very calm character, a calm, collected kind of guy, and it seems to be paying off on the pitch. They seem to, you know, they had a little downturn in form, but even so, you know, they still seem to be pretty together with it, you know, and yeah, he's doing a great job.
well, his
I'd like,
personality.
I'd like to see him clean up this season. I really would.
You'd like to what?
I'd like to see him clean up this
Oh,
season.
well, I would as well. But what I just love it's like a Shankly, Bob Paisley kind of thing,
Yeah,
because Shankly was loud, won everything, you know, and that's the Klopp. And then you've got Bob Paisley, who is Mr. Quiet Man,
yeah,
Slot, who's quiet. But I've just noticed every presser I watch of Slot now, more and more of his personalities coming out, and
yeah.
it's
Slowly, yeah,
very Dutch, you know.
yeah. Very
He's
nice.
very tactical, and he does play a little bit like Klopp system, but he's more reserved. He's
Yeah,
like, instead of playing this pass, just wait and play this pass and this pass, play an extra pass. And yeah, I mean, it seems to be working
and
one.
he seems to be getting a song out of a few players that weren't really. I wouldn't say they weren't at the races, but they weren't at their best. You know, the Gravenbergs this season is unbelievable. And
Jesus, yeah.
the other lad, what's his name? Curly hair. Um, played quite a key role this season.
Curtis Jones,
Curtis Jones,
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah. I
But
mean,
they
that's
weren't. They weren't really. You know, they weren't really sort of first names on the sheet for Klopp, were they? But they, you know, you'd put them in there now.
hmm Yeah, yeah, you wouldn't want to take Grav out. Not a chance. That's the thing. I think with the way the society that we live in, if you have like one or two bad games, everybody writes you off so quickly. And it's the same with the music business. If you have one or two tracks that just aren't cutting it, they're done, you know. And it's just people are so quick to jump on the bandwagon. I mean, I had this conversation the other day. Like Robertson, he's had a few mares this season, but I watched him against Bournemouth and he was absolutely like brilliant. Like he did everything right, and people writing it, his legs have gone and all this crap. And it does annoy me because if if you're wearing a Liverpool shirt, you get behind the team. That's it. I mean, we're in every competition there is still, you know, and people still having a go at players. I mean, you can critique a player, obviously, but when it starts to go like, get him out the team, sell him like Nunes, sell him, get rid of him. But he's chaos, and he brings this chaos, but he also works his arse off. Could he score more goals? Of course he, I'd like him to, but
Well, damn
sometimes
good, yeah.
the system, what Slot plays, doesn't suit him because the midfield, he's a quick lad, and the midfield don't get him the ball quick.
They don't release the ball quickly.
Exactly. And I just think people, that they'll get on his Instagram or Twitter and just, again, critiquing is fine. But when you start going, F this, you're a piece of like, that's just wrong. And I'm sick of it. And if you complain about this Liverpool team, I think football's not for you because we're top of the league, top of the Champions League. We're in a semi-final, and we're also in the FA Cup. What's there to like complain about? But it's because we didn't bring in 3 or 4 people in the transfer window, and we didn't win the transfer trophy. Why mess with a good thing? This is what I mean. If Slot said it, like if there's a player out there that can better this team, they'll bring him in, which I'm sure they will, and I'm sure in the summer there'll be changes. But for now, I'm well happy. I do want to start talking about your music. So your musical roots. What as a kid, what was playing in your house, like your mum and dad?
So, as a kid, I mean, my musical route, and I would imagine that you would have heard this route quite a few times talking to people of my particular age. So growing up, I would say my first musical influences was probably a little bit of punk and quite a lot of ska music. I loved Specials. The first record that I ever bought was an album by Adam and the Ants, down with my mum down the market. We went down the market and she bought me 2. I was only little. I was about 9 or 10. She bought me 2 records, and she bought me the Adam and the Ants album, Kings of the Wild Frontier, and she bought me a 7-inch of Chic, Good Times. And she literally only bought it because we were down the market that we were at. Market. There was a caravan, like a record store, and it was a caravan, and he used to sell 7-inch singles, and he was playing Chic, Good Times, and she was dancing me around like. And Mum, I want that album there, the bloke with the white thing on across his face, Adam Ant. So we got that album, and that was the first LP I bought. But she also bought this 7-inch single for me, and I still got it. So yeah, Specials were a big band for me. I loved all that madness, Bad Manners, Selector. So yeah, all that. And then I suppose going into my teens. So I loved all the synth pop stuff, Human League, New Wave. So if I move into sort of my teen years, my cousin, who's 5 years older than me, he lived near Dartford. And when I was 13 years old, he took me to a nightclub in Dartford called The Flicks. And it's quite a famous nightclub in that it was like the centre for the southern, sort of the Kent soul scene. So you had the Kent Soul Mafia, which was DJs like Greg Edwards, Froggy, Jeff Young. A very young Pete Tong was part of it. Colin Hudd was one of the main guys. Colin Hudd, who went on to work with Paul Oakenfold quite a lot. So they had this scene called the Kent Soul Mafia. So my cousin was quite into that. He was, as I say, he was a few years older than me. He was 19 or 19, 20. And he took me to Flicks, and I was only 30, which was 1983. How I got in, I've no idea, because he must have known people on dogs. I was literally like a little schoolboy turning up at this nightclub. But I went into that nightclub, and I can still remember it to this day. And all these lights were spinning around, and the music, I was like, oh man, this music. And obviously it was all soul and jazz funk from the 80s, from sort of mid 80s. And Shalimar and Loose Ends and Alexander O'Neill, and all that good quality soul music. A lot of it was US, obviously, because the US makes soul music better than the UK did, I personally think. But then a lot of UK stuff as well, like Imagination and Loose Ends, and so that kind of, that I was like, wow, this nightclub, this is great. I definitely want to get involved in this. So I got into soul music big time, soul and funk and jazz funk. And that lasted a while, and and I'm still a big fan of that now. But then the big one came, and the big one was hip hop for me. Still is. I mean, I'm wearing a Beastie Boys cap now. So sort of 86, 87. Well, 86, I bought License to Ill on a cassette, Raising Hell on cassette. Just listened to them relentlessly, Started collecting all the Streets Down stuff on cassette. It was all on cassettes before I started collecting vinyl, really seriously. But yeah, street sounds and all that early sort of early mid 80s to late 80s hip hop was my thing, and I'm still passionate about it now, and I still buy hip hop 12s now second hand. So yeah, I got big time into hip hop. Wasn't really a break dancer. Wasn't really into the graffiti. It was all about the music for me, and obviously the DJing. Loved the DJ element of hip hop. And I suppose that's what drew me to DJing as well. So hip hop was a huge thing for me. And then obviously the next one is acid house. You know, 88 onwards. That's when that bomb drops, and yeah, everyone's focus suddenly changed a little bit.
Yeah,
that's kind of my route, and you probably that's probably similar to a lot of lads.
yeah. Well, it's similar to me as well. Same thing. I bought the Beastie Boys License to Ill. I had the Gatefold album.
Yeah.
I would just look at the artwork, read everything on there. Raising Hell, definitely, and then Mantronics was big for me, just because it was hip hop but electro as well. And
I mean, his production was outrageously good, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I'd never heard really anything like that. You know, obviously I'd heard the hip hop, and you know, Tribe Called Quest were massive for me. You know, De La Soul, and Funky Del the Funky Homo Sapien.
It's the Dobalina.
Yeah, psychedelic like hip hop. It was very different. But Mantronics just took me to another level, and I was like, I want more of that. And kind of the same thing, Acid House came about, and I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
Because I'm liking the sound of it, and I want more of it, you know?
Because there was a period, wasn't there? There was a period from probably sort of 87 through till 90 where the house was starting, the hip hop was still there, and you had like this fusion where you could go to a nightclub and you could hear both of it. You know, for instance, Tim Simmons Bomb the Bass.
Yeah,
he's one of my all-time heroes. I think he was an absolute genius. If you go, I used to go to a club in London called Dance Wicked, and he would DJ there sometime, and he'd play all of it. He'd play, you know, he'd play a bit of house and a bit of hip hop and a bit of hip house, and it was like, oh man, it was the best time. Best time.
It's like I wish I could, you know, like obviously get a time machine and go back and just relive those days. But yeah, I mean, Acid House happened, you know, 88, 89, you know, but I was also obviously, you know, from the Northwest, like Liverpool. So I was listening to, you know, indie music as well. You know, Happy Monday, Stone Roses came along, and you were like, yeah, you had the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a good time to grow up, you know. I mean, Thatcherism was, you know, pretty much leaving. I mean, you know, obviously she didn't want us to dance in fields, that's for damn sure, you know.
No.
Huh?
Still did though.
Yeah, of course he did. Yeah, by the thousands. So what made is that what made you want to become a DJ? Is just listening to all these people?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the turntablism in hip hop, you know, fascinates me. As a sort of late teenager, I started going to DMC events, Disco Mix Club, and I was at the Hippodrome when Cash Money won. DJ Cash Money won. I think it was 87. The following year was Chad Jackson, 88. But that turntablism thing, you know, fascinated me. And I actually bought a pair of Technics when I was quite young as well. So I got into DJing. I'll tell you what happened. When I left school, it's quite a fun story actually. When I left school at 16, I got a job in a restaurant as a waiter, and it was a Happy Eater. Do you remember Happy Eaters? So there was Happy Eater, and then there was the other one, the Little Chef. But there was a Happy Eater just down the road from my mum, because by this time my mum and dad had moved out of London. We lived down in Kent, near Tunbridge Wells. We left South London and went down to Kent, and there was this little restaurant down the road from our house called a Happy Eater. And my mum said, you know, you left school, got to get a job. Summer holidays, you've got to go and get a job. So I went and worked in this Happy Eater, and I met this lad there called Ben, who's still a friend of mine to this day. And he'd already left home, and he lived in this big house, and he shared a house with a guy who had he was a mobile DJ, and he did like all parties. events and what have you. And it was Ben that basically introduced me to DJing, because he said, "Do you want to come? Do you want to come to one of these events with us? Because we do the parties down in Hastings for the foreign language schools, foreign language schools. So every summer you get all these foreign students coming over from France and Spain and what have you, and they were staying in hotels and hostels down in Hastings along the coast. And the language school had to put on parties for them in the evening. So this lad that Ben lived with used to get these gigs, lumping all these big speakers and decks and lights and everything onto the pier in Hastings, and also down in the caves. And so I went along with him one day, and I was like a roadie, carrying all the speakers and stuff, and he set up this massive sound system. And Ben was having a go on the decks, and the other fellow was having a go on the decks, and I said, "Do you want to go on the decks playing the records?" So it was literally just like press play and play a record, then press play and play another record. So there wasn't much turntablism going on, but that's basically what made me think, "Oh, I really like this. I want to have a go at this. This is what Jazzy Jeff's doing. This is what Cutmaster Swift is doing. This is what Cash Money's doing. I know they're doing a little bit differently to this, but this is where it starts." So not long after that, I saved up and I bought myself some Technics. I never went belt drives. I went straight to Technics, and it took me a while to save up because they were half expensive. But I went straight to Technics, and I'd already started collecting records, but way before then. So since my mum bought those records for me down that market that day, I was gradually, buying a bit of vinyl here and there in a shop in Tunbridge Wells. And so I had some records, bought some decks, set it up to me Hitachi hi-fi in my bedroom, had a little Cytronic mixer, and started learning how to DJ, and literally just self-taught. And that's how I got into DJing originally. Obviously loved the turntablism side of it, but then house music came along, and it was like a little bit different. It was like mixing club records together and syncing beats together, and it was a little bit different than the turntablism side of things. And I was like, well, as we all were, we were transfixed by this repetitive beat in a nightclub, going to raves and things. Although I was never massively into the rave scene as such. Used to go to raves, but you'd always find me in the back room listening to house music, acid house, Eddie Richards or Paul Trouble Anderson or someone like that, or whoever, just in the house room rather than in the big jungle rave room out the front. So that's how I got into DJing, and I was fascinated by it.
Well, how did you meet Louis?
So that happened many years later. So that was 98. I met Louis. So I've come forward quite a few years. I've been DJing, so I built up a little bit of a DJ career locally down in Kent, doing some parties and promoting some parties and what have you, local nightclubs. My actual profession is I work in the building industry. I'm a contracts manager for a construction company, and I used to work for a big construction company, like a national. In fact, they're an international company, and I was there for like 9 or 10 years with my training and thing. But I decided to jack that all in. 1997. I thought, I'm not doing this anymore. I want to give this music business and this DJing a go. My dad went absolutely bananas. We fell out about it big time. But because he was a builder as well. But I just jacked it all. I did all my training and everything. I was at this big firm, had a really good job, but I knocked it all on the head. So no, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to go and live in Ibiza. So 1997, jacked in my job, went to live in Ibiza, and blagged my way into a residency at Mambo. So Cafe Mambo, and they also had the one up the road, just a little bit further up the strip, called Cafe Savannah. They were owned by the guy called Javier, who's like obviously an Ibiza legend. So at Mambo's, you had Pete Gooding and Steve Lawler as residents that summer. So Lawler, in the early part of his career, he was just breaking through. Gooding was there in the early part of his career. Obviously, both went on to do really well. But I came in as almost like a substitute. I used to play most of my sets at Savannah, but every now and again I'd get a gig down at Mambo, which was obviously, everyone used to go to Mambo. They still do. I think Mambo's changed a bit now, actually, but back in the 90s, Mambo was the place. So I went to live in Ibiza, stayed out there all summer, stayed out there for the winter as well, actually. And then when I came back, actually go back to Ibiza, and there was the Radio 1 weekend, as Radio 1 used to do. And I met a guy in Ibiza called Eddie Gordon. Now, Eddie Gordon wore many hats. He originally started Manifesto Records, used to work at Mercury, started Manifesto Records, which obviously was a bit of a hit factory. They had loads of big records. But he left Manifesto and he started his own thing called Neo Records, which was like a dance music label, did a lot of trance music. Eddie also managed Pete Tong at the time. He was also had a production company called West End Radio Productions. They produced all the dance shows for Radio 1. So Judge Jules, Danny Rampling, Pete Tong, all those dance shows West End used to produce. So Eddie was kind of in charge of all this. Essential mixes, Radio 1 weekends, the Ibiza thing. Eddie used to be in charge of all that. He's not anymore. But I met him in Ibiza that summer, and I was doing a set at Mambo. And literally a daytime set, playing all this Balearic stuff and like a bit of pop music, bit of Spanish music, as the DJs do there during the day. You know, it's fairly chilled. And he was down there having a meeting. I think he was having a meeting with Javier. And they were out the front having a meeting. They were probably talking about, you know, arrangements for the weekend for the Radio 1 thing. And he came up to the booth afterwards and said, "I really like your music." He said, "Yeah, it's really, you know, really cool stuff what you're playing there." And he said, "You know, you out here for the summer?" I said, "Yeah, just out here for the summer, but I'll be going back." He said, "No, well, you know, look me up when you get back." He said, "I'm starting a label called Neo Records." Didn't think anything more of it. So I went home after my time in Ibiza, and my cousin Trevor used to have a studio in Welling, South London. And in that studio, he used to manage a few producers, a couple of singers. And it was a studio above a shop. He used to have a greengrocers, and above the greengrocers, he had this studio, and then another studio out the back in the garage. But the producers that he worked with, one was called Eddie Fingers, ended up getting signed to Perfecto, and Eddie used to produce all Fabio Paras's music for him. So Outrage, all the Fabio Paras stuff, Sound Clash Republic, that all came out of the studio was called The Planet in Welling, South London. And my cousin Trev said to me one day, he said, I'd been up there, used to hang out at the studio, and used to love watching all the guys do the production. Didn't really have a go. I had a little go one day, but with another guy who was making a record for me. He said, "Well, what sort of music do you want to make?" All right, we put something together. Rubbish. Anyway, one day Trev said to me, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm starting a new business." I said, "Oh, are you?" "Yeah." He says, "I'm going into partnership with the guy who I've met, who I've known for a few years." "Oh, right, yeah, okay." He said, "Yeah, it's a bloke called Eddie Gordon." I was like, "Really?" I said, "I met him in Ibiza last summer." He said, "No way." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Me and Eddie are going into business. We're going to start a label called Neo Records." I'm like, wow, amazing. And they did. And I ended up working for them, and I got the job as label manager. In fact, I didn't start off as label manager. I just went up there and I was in the building. They had an office in a studio in Fulham. And they were signing records from Holland, a lot of trance music, blah, 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 a bit of Ferry Corsten stuff, bit of this, bit of that, bit of house music, bit of Mark Picciotti records from America. But the label manager was DJ Lottie. Remember Lottie? She was a resident at Cream, and she was resident at Turnmills in London. She got the gig as label manager. She was there like 3 or 4 weeks, but her DJ career was already beginning to take off. And she was more interested in doing that than she was being a label manager. So she decided to go and do a DJ career. Good move, because she did really well for herself. But the vacancy was there for the label manager. And obviously, I'd never been a label manager, didn't really know what to do. Trev said to me, "I'm going to ask Eddie if we can make you label manager." I was like, "Really? Don't really know what a label manager does, but okay, let's go for it." So I got the gig as label manager, and I was there for 2.5 years. So I was learning how to run a record label. Eddie was obviously a very talented music man, is A&R, ideas man. Trev was a businessman. Trev was the financial director. That was his role. I was there as label manager. We were signing all this music. There were people coming into the building all the time. Pete Tong used to come down. Paul Oakenfold used to come down. Sasha used to come down. Carl Cox was always in the building because Eddie's other half, Rachel, was managing Carl Cox at the time. So I was getting to meet these people. Like, it was like, oh, this is unbelievable. I mean, I've struck gold here. And then Trev said to me one day, "Why don't you have a go at making a record?" Like, "Well, I mean, yeah, don't mind. I'll have a go." And I got introduced, a mutual friend of mine and Louis. I hadn't met Louis at that time, but I got introduced to him via a mutual friend of ours. And it was at a party, it was at a club that we went to, got chatting to Louis. And he already had his own studio down in Essex. He'd been making music for years, like the various different names. He started off making like hardcore and jungle, and he started doing some housey stuff. And I told him that I was working at Neo Records, and I need to find someone to help me make some records. And he was like, "Oh, let's have a go at making some tunes together." So, no harm, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So we did, and we made a couple of records. I did some remixes for Neo. We put some records out under the name Alaska. And then we started our own label called Pod Recordings, and that was like a progressive, tribal kind of progressive house label around. I'm talking about around 2000, 2001, around the millennium. That's how I met Louis. Yeah, I mean, he'd been in the music business quite a long time by the time I met him. He was already established. Yeah, that's how that came about. And me and Louis ended up working together for about 12 or 13 years. So we had that label Pod Recordings for a few years. And then the whole decline of vinyl, that sort of, the music industry went through a bit of a slump, actually. And we had a bit of a break. And then we came back with Streetlife DJs around 2005. And that's when Streetlife started, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you had, a good record with Streetlife,
Yeah, it went. You know what? So Streetlife started in 2005, and then we knocked it on the head in 2010. So we had 5 years, and it was 5 years of pretty good stuff. It was because we'd already been in. It wasn't like we were starting We started something new, but we were already in the business. So it's not like we were completely green. We knew, and we came back with a completely new sound, and it was 100% influenced by Soulwax and Too Many DJs, without a shadow of a doubt. 2004, 2005, you had that old French influence. There was Kitsune Records, there was Ed Banger, Soulwax, Justice, Sebastian. That exploded. And for me, it was like anti-house. It was almost nothing to do with house music. It had nothing to do with like American garage or house. It had nothing to do with the progressive scene. It was something completely fresh. It was like electro flash. It was more indie than dance, I thought. It was very much an indie dance thing. And I found it really exciting. I was totally blown away with it. There was obviously hip hop elements to it as well. You had the Ed Banger crew from Paris. They were massively influenced by hip hop. You had Uffy and DJ Mehdi. They were making hip hop records, but to sound like electro dance, electro house, I suppose you could call it. But that sound and that Soulwax thing, that Soulwax mashup thing, I was blown away by it. I was like, these guys are incredible. Soulwax are just incredible. Got hold of the Too Many, the Hang the DJ compilations, Hang the DJ Volume 1, 2, 3, 4. And I was listening to these thinking, this is outrageously good. It's so fresh and so different to what I've been listening to in the whole previous run up, through acid house, through progressive house. It's completely different to that. It's still dance music, but it's just put together in a very, very different way. And I found it really exciting. And I said to Louis, with our knowledge and our musical backgrounds and our influences and your technical ability in the studio, because he's very, very talented technically in the studio, we could do this. We could do this. We could be like a British version of Too Many DJs and do this mashup and make our own mashups and make our own mixtapes and make our own records. And we did. And we made this mixtape called Nevermind the Balearics, Here's the Streetlife DJs. And Louis started a podcast. So this is 2005. So podcasts were really new at the time, really new. And you could upload your podcast on Apple, on iTunes, for no charge, no cost, no licensing, no nothing. You could just upload it. And we did this mixtape called Nevermind the Balearics, sent a few of them out, pressed them up onto a CD. So it was an 80-minute mix. It was the template was Hang the DJs by Soulwax, as many records as you can get into a 75-minute mix, all mashed up, layers, cuts, chops, just get as much into it as you can, but make it sound really polished, not like a complete mess, not like a car crash. It's got to sound good. That was always my thing. We've got to make this sound good. So when you actually play it out, it works and it doesn't sound like a car crash. Because if it sounds like a car crash, people ain't going to buy into it. I mean, the Soulwax things were great. You know, they did it really well. So I said, that's what we've got to try and achieve. We made this mixtape, sent a few out, got received really well. Like I sent one to Mix Mag, and they said it was the most listened to mixtape in the office all that year. That was Ralph Moore that said that. Sent one to DJ Cole Logan, picked up on it. Music Magazine, they picked up on it. We were starting to get interviews and like things like, oh, this is really beginning to take off, Lou. Anyway, he started this podcast, and we uploaded that mix, and it just absolutely snowballed. Because you could obviously monitor how many downloads you had, and it just went bananas. Just like it was like watching a car mileometer on, you know, on when the wheels go and the mileometer's doing like that. It's just like the downloads were ridiculous. It was so fast. We ended up having, like, over the course of, I think we did about 20 podcasts over the course of a couple of years. And when I say podcast, all it was a mix. There was no speaking. It was just us producing a DJ mix. And it wasn't a live mix. It was a studio produced mix. We would jam in the studio. So we'd have the CDJs all set up, and we would do jam sessions and record it all, but then edit it all together rather than just do one continuous live mix. It was all live, but polished and cut and edited so it would sound really, really professional. We uploaded about, I don't know, 15, 20 of these mixes. We must have had nearly 5 million downloads. It went stratospheric, and yeah, we got offers all over the place. So we had a manager, a guy called Phil Sales, offered to manage us. And Phil's now managing Frankie Wild. But he's managed Sasha, he's managed Mark Knight. He works at the 360 group. We had a booking agent called Amy Thompson. She came in and did all our bookings. And it just literally took off so fast. It was neither of us could really believe it. It was like we'd done it at the right time. We got lucky. And obviously we did it well, which was another factor. You know, it sounded really good. Really proud of those mixes that we did as Streetlife DJs, and they still stand up now when you listen to them. And then the next step was make some records. So we had to start making some records, and you know, I said, right, so we've got a complete. I was always the ideas man. You know, Louis the technical genius in the studio. He was the one that understood music programs. He could play piano. He was the glue that sort of stuck my ideas together, really. I would come and go, look, we've got to make a record like this. See that sample there, blah, blah, blah. And between us, we'd come up. We started making some records and putting some mashups out and this, that, and the other. And we made a record called Gun Crime, which got signed to Kitsune Records, which was obviously at the time one of the hip labels. It was one of this French boutique label. They used to put out this thing called Kitsune Maison compilation, which was like just literally a compilation album on CD and on vinyl. But they used to sell thousands of them around the world because it was such a cool boutique little label. They're actually a clothing brand as well. But I said to Louis, right, we want to try and get our records out, and rather than put them out ourselves this time, we want to try and get signed. What label do we want to sign to? We're like, well, the best two labels is Headbanger and Kitsune. Right, so we've got to find out who to contact. And we spoke to Phil, our manager, said, Phil, you need to find out who we need to send our record to. So we made this record called Gun Crime, which sampled Henry Mancini. You know the Peter Gunn theme? Which is out the Blues Brothers, but it's actually written by Henry Mancini. We sampled it, we didn't sample it. We replayed it. We got our guitarist in to replay it. So we replayed it all. We got publishing clearance from Henry Mancini's publisher to use it, which was unbelievable. We didn't manage to keep any publishing, and we said, right, let's send this record out. So we sent it to Kitsune, and within a week we were signed to Kitsune. They loved it. And again, we're like looking at each other thinking, what's going on here? This is mad. Pete Tong played it. Annie Mac played it on the radio. Yeah. Mad times when I think about it.
Well, I mean, I last week I listened to your 2007 Essential mix, and I hadn't listened to that for years and years, and it still stands the test of time. It's
noisy.
Yeah, but it's brilliant, you know. I mean, I put that in a class of same with Liam Howlett, Dirt Chamber, also
See, that was one of our biggest influences. That album, what an album! You know, Louis actually knows Liam Howlett. So Louis from Essex, lives in Southend, and he used to go to his dad is quite famous actually. His dad renovates VWs for a living, and he also does drag racing. So he does all this interior work, specialist interior work. So when you want your VW camper or your Beetle with a really fancy interior, all these VW specialists used to take their cars to Louis' dad, Bernie, and he became quite famous. He won loads of awards. But every year they used to go to this thing called Bug Jam, which is a little festival at Santa Pod Raceway. And Louis used to be the resident DJ at Bug Jam. And one year they booked the Prodigy to headline Bug Jam. Louis warmed up for them. He met all the boys, got to know Liam. So Louis had a connection with Prodigy. We actually remixed one of their records for them when what album was it? I can't remember. Invaders Must Die. You know that album? Mm-hmm. So there's a track called Take Me to the Hospital, and we did a Streetlife DJs mix of that. But yeah, so Louis knows Liam, but that album, Dirt Chamber Sessions, that, Soul Wax, and then there's a couple of other albums. John Carter's Live at the Social album. There's a few albums that were hugely influential. Oh, Cold Cut, Journeys by DJ. There's a few albums that are hugely influential. You know, it's probably 5 or 6 albums that are hugely influential as to how Streetlife DJs came about. And Dirt Chamber is definitely one of them, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible how many tracks he gets in there, you know.
Yeah.
And it flows. It's not, you know, you do hear some like mixes today, you know, 40 tracks on there, but they don't.
And they don't do it very well.
No, they don't. You can tell where the cut is, and it just doesn't flow. But Dirt Chamber, from start to finish, you're just like, holy shit! This. I mean, Liam's again, no pun intended, a prodigy. Like he's absolutely amazing at everything he does. You know, but he does it from. You can tell he does it from the heart. You know.
Oh yes.
He could give 2 fucks about, you know, being a rock star, superstar, whatever people want to call him. He's still Liam, you know.
Yeah.
That's what I love about him. You know, I had Leroy on a couple of years ago, and again, you know, he's just so down to earth, and it was just great listening to him tell the stories of the Prodigy. Just, you know, 4 mates, just living the best days ever. And you know, it is weird. And fair play to Leroy. You know, he told me he'd just come to a point where he was just like, me being a dancer for them. Just it's you know, he knew they all had a different talent, and he wasn't going to be a part of that. And you know, it is very like from somebody who's not part of that, you're just going, you just left like one of the best bands in the world, you know. And he's like, I'm all right with it, you know. He's got his DJing, he's doing his tracks and stuff, and doing very well, you know. So fair play to him. So, but yeah, that's Dirt Chambers. Just, you know, it used to be on every day for me, you know. Get up.
It's one of those ones that you just come back to all the time. Actually, Louis and I went, because obviously Louis did the Bug Jam thing every summer, and we went to one. This was quite a few years after he did that warm up for the project, and Liam was the guest DJ, and it was Liam doing a Dirt Chamber DJ set, and he did it all on vinyl. Now, obviously, it didn't flow quite the same as what the mixtape did, because obviously he produced that, but it was all there, and you know, he knows what he's doing, and he's not a turntablist as such, but he didn't need to be. He just knew how to bring them in and how to mix them in and when to mix them in, and he played a bit of new stuff, but there was a lot of Dirt Chamber in that set, and it was I was just standing there like, for that. I wish I could do that.
Don't we all? Well, when did you think, you know, with Streetlife DJs, when did you know, like, okay, we need to just.
So Louis and I worked together in total for about 13 years, and I would say the last 6 of that was Streetlife. We started in around 2004 and finished in 2010. So over that 6 years, it was like a whirlwind. It really was. It was, you know, we'd never achieved that kind of level with anything we'd done previously. You know, Pod Recordings was an okay progressive label. I was doing a bit of DJing. Louis was doing a bit of DJing. We were making tunes. It was all right. Streetlife just went to a whole new level for us. It was, you know, we were in uncharted territory, and it was a bit of a whirlwind. It was a lot of fun, a lot of traveling. We were, you know, we did okay financially. It wasn't, you know, we did all right, made a living out of it. We didn't have to do anything else for a good few years. It was hard graft. It's not a glamorous lifestyle that people think it is. You know, when you're traveling, not constantly just DJing and trying to find time to make records as well. But you know, I'm not complaining. It was bloody great. It got to the stage. So Louis was married. I wasn't. It got to the stage where Louis didn't want to do so much traveling. Him and his wife Tina were trying for a child. They ended up getting pregnant, and they ended up having a child. And obviously, he needed to take a step back, and that was absolutely fine. At that time, I started doing all the gigs on my own. So Louis would be in the studio Monday to Friday. I would say this was over the last year of that 6-year period. Louis would be in the studio, and I would be doing the gigs. Now, I went off and did tours of Australia, tours of America, tours of Asia. That label that we were signed to, Kitsune, huge in Asia, absolutely huge. So there was a lot of Asian tours, you know, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, yada, 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 all that South Asian area. Lot of touring over there. But I was doing these gigs on my own a lot of the time. Now, when you're part of a partnership and you're called the Streetlife DJs, and there's 2 of you in the press show, when one of you turns up to do a gig, sometimes the promoters would go, "Where's the other one? where's Louis?" But yeah, well, he couldn't make it, unfortunately. And it got to the stage where our manager was saying, we're getting feedback from promoters that, you know, they're not happy that only one of you's there, because the people are coming to see both of you. They want to see you both on the decks doing your thing, yada yada yada. And that was fair enough. And there wasn't a catalyst really for us knocking it on the head. Louis and Tina had their baby. Louis was still working Monday to Friday. I was doing my thing and doing the touring, and I think it ran its course. We didn't have an argument as such. We just suddenly, you know, we've been working together. We've been in each other's pockets for 12 years, and it was a case of I think we need to have a break, and we did. Louis instigated it. He took a step back and said, "Right, I'm just gonna bow out for a little while and get on with my life." And basically, you can do what you want. You can carry on with Streetlife, or you can't carry on with Streetlife. And I did for a little while, but I decided without Louis in the mix, you know, part of the game these days is making music. You can't just be a DJ. You can just be a DJ, but if you want to progress, to promote yourself, you need to make tunes. That's the bottom line. And at the time, I was never able to do that on my own. It was always a partnership. I was the ideas man. Louis would make sense of those ideas. We'd make the record. So him coming away from that, it was almost like we lost the whole production element. And it didn't take long for me to realise, do you know what? I don't think I've probably bothered to do this anymore. So I decided to have a break as well, and that was probably halfway through 2010, getting on towards the end of the year. Yeah, 15 years ago. Yeah, just stopped, literally overnight. Don't want to do it anymore. We put 3 records out on Kitsune. We gave them an album that they never put out, because we actually had plans to form a bit of a soul wax type band, or a digitalism, or those electronic bands. I wouldn't go as far as to say LCD sound system, because they're next level. But we did have plans to try and put a band together, because I used to play drums. Louis is obviously a keyboard player, computer. Our mate Gus, who I work with now, by the way, on Silvertooth, who's still my writing partner, he was going to join and be, because he's a brilliant instrumentalist, guitarist, and keyboard player. He was going to be a band. We had singers at our disposal. We were going to try and put this album that we'd made and turn it into a live thing. And our manager feels like, you've got to do this, because at the time there was a huge demand for it. You know, the dance acts doing live shows, it was massive. It was, you know, there weren't enough of them.
Mm-hmm.
So there was huge potential to do that. But obviously it was going to be a big ask time-wise, and it was going to be a lot of investment time-wise. And yeah, we weren't in the right frame of mind for it. So we just, and Kitsune said, look, we can't do anything. The album had a few samples in it. They said, we can't really, they didn't want to invest any of the money into clearing the samples. And they could see that the writing was on the wall for Streetlife. They knew that it wasn't, we hadn't delivered them a single for ages. And it was like, you can have your album back, boys. So that never got released, unfortunately. But yeah, it just ran its natural course, Daz, and we just decided to knock it on the head. And funnily enough, Louis and I didn't speak to each other for a long, long time. For no particular reason. Just, you know, we weren't friends before we met. We almost met as partners. We went to the studio together. It's not like we were already mates and like, oh, should we make a record one night? It was like we met and went straight into like some kind of business relationship. It was like we met to go and make a record, and that's how that relationship blossomed. But it was always a business partnership. We were never friends before, and when we stopped, it was like, oh, we've been in each other's pockets for so long. We need a break from it all. So we did. We just lost touch. Obviously, Louis went off and with his family, and they're still living in Southend. And we got back in touch with him just recently, actually, just about a year ago. And I dropped him a line, and yeah, it was like nothing, like no time had passed at all. We just started talking again. So yeah, that was good.
Well, I want to talk about the Silvertooth project.
Yeah.
You know, again, you've had this massive break, and you've come out with some blinders. Like it's refreshing for me, especially as I get older. You know, we've chatted a little bit back and forth on WhatsApp. You know, I'm into the chuggers. You know, the slower BPMs. I think
Too,
the
yeah.
older you get, you know, the more slower the BPMs get. You know, 110 for me is like spot on. Now with Silvertooth, you know, it's obviously, you know, you said you've got a partner in Silvertooth as well. Is this like a refresh for you now? Because, you know, you're in a different type of industry again. Yes, it's still the music industry, but we're in more of a social media industry.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on like the whole thing of like having to come back into the music business?
I'm fairly nonplussed about the social media thing, if I'm being honest. I struggle with it. I don't particularly like it. I realise that it ain't going to go anywhere. It's only going to become more of a thing. Silvertooth. So I took a long break from the music business as such. I was still going out, still interested in music, still following it, but not actually involved in it as such. Occasionally doing a bit of DJing, but not seriously. And that lasted quite a long time, actually. I would occasionally go to the studio and meet Gus, who's my co-writer, because he's got a studio and he's involved heavily in his business in all kinds of different capacities. But I'd occasionally go and make a record with him because I had the itch, or I'd occasionally go and do a bit of DJing here and there. But generally speaking, I'd put it down. I was out of it and just watching from afar. But a name I've not mentioned so far, who's been a massive influence on my career, and I would say from the 90s onwards, is Andrew Weatherall. Been a huge follower of Andrew Weatherall. God bless him, because he's obviously no longer with us, and he's a sad loss. But followed his career forever. In fact, you know, since the early days of One Dove and Primal Scream and Boyzone, etc. And that's a story that's been well documented over the last few years. But he's always been a huge influence on me, and his music is, you know, is otherworldly. There's no one that sounds like Andrew Weatherall. He's a proper enigma. And it was around the same time that I gave up Streetlife with Louis. I've got a pal who lives in London. He's one of my best friends called Finchy, and we used to go clubbing together. Still do, even though we're getting on a bit. but he's always had his ear to the ground musically. Always found a new tune. He's a music aficionado. He knows everything about music. Loves music from 70s rock through to the most recent whatever. Loves music. And he said to me one day, he said, Stu, he said, there's a new party started up in North London, Stoke Newington. It's a Weathers party. Andrew Weatherall. He says, it's a Weathers party. He says, and it's right down the street. He says, I think we're gonna like it. We've got to go. I said, what is it all about? He said, well, I've only heard about it, but apparently they play really slow music. That sounds great. I said, that sounds great. He says, yeah, it's only little. He said, and it's on a school night as well. So you're gonna have to go to work next day, or so don't worry about it, let's go. So we bowled up to Stoke Newington to a place called The Drop, which was underneath a pub. And it was a small basement venue. I mean, we'd been to see Andrew Weatherall loads of times, like countless times. Fabric, Sabres, Haywire. You know, we'd followed him for his entire career. But he started this night called A Love from Outer Space with Sean Johnston, who was another DJ who's been on the scene for donkey's years, not to the same kind of level or notoriety as Andrew, but he's been around on the scene. He's done his time. He's an acid house stalwart. And they started this party called A Love from Outer Space. And me and Finchy were in there that night. We were a bit stoned. And it was full of people all our age, like all 40-year-olds. This was 2010, so 15 years ago. And I swear to you, it was like we'd found what we were looking for. It was like an epiphany. And it's like we'd been looking for this our entire lives. And that's how it felt. I'm not saying we had been, but it's how it felt. It's like, oh, this is great. I'm loving all this music. The music it starts off really, really slow. I mean, do you know much about Love from Outer Space? You must have heard of it.
I do, yeah.
You know all about it, right? So it starts off really slow. They start off at like 95 BPM, and they play dub records and atmospheric sort of ambient records, and gradually, and they just the two of them DJ all night. Gradually, it just slowly builds. And people start just shuffling around and nodding their head and getting high and chatting away and drinking Guinness, and it was a really lovely atmosphere. And we came without wait, and then by the end of the night, by 6 hours later, it's not a techno kind of BPM. It's about 100 BPM. But when you start at 95 BPM, 118 sounds absolutely like it's absolutely raging. It's not, but it sounds like it. And also the music's really, really, it's got a real kind of earthiness to it and a real atmospheric to it. And we came away from that thinking, I mean, this was probably the third or the fourth party that they'd done. They'd started a few months earlier in the year. Finchy had heard about it, and he said, we've got to go. So we probably went to the fourth one. By that point, it got a bit of a following. The place was full. The basement was absolutely full, rammed. And we came away from that thinking, that was unbelievable. I've never heard anything like that. It was just completely new to me. I mean, how can you start a club so slow? People lock into it and just, if you go back to like the late 80s and early acid house, Balearic was really slow anyway. So that's how I remember it. But anyway, we came away thinking, that was great. We've got to go again. We've been going ever since. And followed them round. So they were at the Drop. They went to Corsica. They went to Block in Hackney. They did the festival, festival in Victoria Park. And now they're obviously Andrew passed away a few years ago, but now Sean does what he does. He does a lot from Outer Space all around the country now. But he's at Phonox in London, and he's at Waterbury in Brighton, just up the road from me. So I go to them regularly. But how did Silvertooth come about? So obviously getting into this slower music, really into it, and buying a lot of it as well. Even though I wasn't actively DJing, in that period from 2010 onwards, buying a lot of it, buying the limited edition 12s, buying all the re-edits, just, collecting it. Like yourself, collecting trainers, just collecting this music, because I'm a music person. You want to have this stuff at your disposal, even though you can go and listen to it on Spotify, but we won't talk about Spotify because that's the devil. But just having all this music on your computer, so you can put a set together and do a mix. And then we start Silvertooth. So, as I said, I've been doing a track every now and again with Gus in the studio, just to satisfy my own little creative needs, really. And as I said to you earlier, Louis was always the brains when it comes to production in the partnership. Now, I didn't have that anymore. Obviously, I had Gus, but Gus has never been my full-time partner in music. We get together anyway. I got my head around Ableton, is the bottom line. I've never been computer minded. I've never been that person that can understand computer programs in a big way. Obviously, I know the basics, but a thing like Ableton or Logic, Pro Logic, were always a step too far for me. I'm never going to understand that. And my friend Tom Mangan, who's T Mango, he produces under the name T Mango, signed to Compact and Permanent Vacation. He's done loads of stuff. He used to be an online advisor for Ableton. And Gus uses Ableton. And I know lots of people use Ableton. And even my nephew uses Ableton. You know, they all say, oh, it's a really intuitive bit of kit. You can get your head around it really quite easily. So Tom loaded Ableton up on my computer for him, Tom Mangan. And he just said, open it up, start playing with it, have a go. He said, you know, the best thing you could do is try and put a little mix together. Instead of trying to make a track, try and sequence some records together. So pretend you're DJing, but instead of actually playing the tunes, put them in order and mix them together, almost like a pre-recorded set. And that's a dirty word, but he said it's a good way of practicing how to use the software. He says, I'm not saying, you know, you should pre-record your sets. He said, in fact, when he loaded Ableton onto my computer, pre-recorded sets weren't even a thing. This is how far back we're going. But he said, just have a go with it and start playing with it. So I did, and I made some mixtapes, and I gradually got my head around it. And I eventually thought, well, the next thing is I've got to start making a tune. And it wasn't very long ago that I started doing it. So I would probably say, where are we now? We're in the middle of 25. So I would say early part of 2023. So about 2 years ago, I decided I was going to make a tune. And I don't have a keyboard. I don't have any synthesizers or soft synths or anything. All I have is my laptop and Ableton. So I went to see Gus, and he said, look, the best thing we could do is record some parts. Let's get your idea down. Let's record some parts. You take those parts away with you, see if you can structure a record. And I did, and I came up with one, and it's called Diversion. I've never released it, and I might actually go back on it and knock it into shape now. I know what I'm doing, or I know a bit more of what I'm doing. I wouldn't say I know what I'm doing, but I'm getting there. And I made this track, and Gus said, look, you've done it. He says, you don't need to have 10 synthesizers, drum machines, compressors, this, that, and the other. He says, you've put a track together. And it really gave me a shot in the arm and a bit of confidence, because, you know, I've always been that kind of a bit unsure about technology. But it gave me a shot in the arm. And since then, I mean, blimey, I've made loads of them. And one day I was listening to Six Music. I'm an avid listener of Six Music, especially when I was driving to and from work. And Lauren Laverne was on the radio in the morning, and she played a song by Gil Scott-Heron, which was called Shut 'Em Down. And it was when all that right-wing rioting was going off, and the Ukraine war started, and there was a lot of horrible stuff in the news. She played this record called Shut 'Em Down. It's by Gil Scott-Heron, who was obviously a poet and an activist and an amazing lyricist. Now, I had that record. I've got the album that record is on, that he made with Brian Jackson, and I'd forgotten all about it. And it was on the radio. Ding, 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 shut 'em down. I thought, bloody hell, this would make a fantastic Balearic record. That piano riff is straight out of Boy's Own, or, you know, early Balearic sounds. You know, it sounds like a Weatherall record already, and it's not. It's a Gil Scott-Heron record. You got this really loose drum pattern and bass line. I thought, Christ, you could make a really good Balearic version of this. And I thought, right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. This is gonna be my first Silvertooth record, official Silvertooth record, because I had made a few before them, which I've never really put out. So I went to Gus and I said, right, we've got to play some parts to emulate this record. I want the piano. I'd already put some drums down myself, because I used to be a drummer, and I'm all right with drums. So he played the piano part for me. We played a synthesizer in. And I said, instead of a normal bass line, I said, I want to use a 303. So we've got the 303 plug-in up. We played this lovely fat 303. Anyway, I took all those parts away with me, and I made the instrumental, and it was It was great. Obviously, it wasn't mixed down, it wasn't finished, but as a demo, it sounded good. I thought, right, well, I've got to find a vocalist now. So I went to see Joel, Joel is from TJ Hookers, manages lots of different people. Joel's partner, Jane, she runs a choir where we live in Seaford, down on the coast near Brighton. We're at Brighton. She's a choir mistress. She runs several different choirs. She's got an incredible voice. She sounds really soulful, really gospel. And I played her the track, and in the original Gil Scott Heron version, it's the backing vocals, and it sounds like someone, you know, deep South American gospel, soulful. And she says, I can do that for you. I can record that. In less than an hour, she'd laid down all the backing track, all the backing vocals for me, and sent me the parts back. And she'd also laid it into my demo, and it sounded bloody incredible. And I said, oh, well, that sounds identical. That's brilliant. I said, well, what am I going to do about a lead vocal? I need that lead vocal. And she said, right. She said, well, I know lots of vocalists. She said, how about this guy? And it was a guy this black guy, you know, from Brighton. Sounded like, it was really soulful. Sounded like Luther Vandross. I was like, it's a bit too soft, isn't it? I mean, Gil Scott Heron's got a real raspiness to his voice. And she looked at Joel. She went, what about Ashley? And I said, who's Ashley? She said, do you remember Freak Power? Turn on, tune in and drop out. I said, well, I know the tune. Obviously, it was massive. She said, the Norman Cook record. I said, yes. She said, that is Ashley Slater. I was like, pull that tune up. So we had to listen to that tune, turn on, tune in, drop out. And she said, yeah. She said, he doesn't sound like that anymore. She said, his voice has gone down a few octaves and he's been smoking his entire life. She says he's got a real raspiness to his voice. So she WhatsApped it there and then on the spot. Ashley, he lives in Germany or Spain. I can't remember. Ashley, what are you up to? Blah, 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 blah. My friend Stewart's doing a Gil Scott Heron cover. Do you want to do the vocal? Instantly, he came back and said, oh, funnily enough, Freak Power toured with Gil Scott Heron back in the 90s around the UK. He said, yeah, I'll give it a go. Send the track over. And it was like, I swear to you, it was like all the stars aligned that day, because within 3 hours, I had the lead vocals back. And he dropped those lead vocals into the demo that Jane sent him that had her backing vocals on. Now, they weren't spaced correctly. They weren't timed up right. They weren't produced. But I knew we had a bloody good record just by listening to it. I think this is going to work. Once I get that in, time it all up, put some pressure on the vocals. Once I take it all into a mastering studio and get it finished, it would sound incredible. And it did. It sounded incredible. And I'm so proud of it. And the fact that I did largely most of it on, you know, off my own back. I mean, obviously Gus helped me write the music, but producing it, I produced it myself, and then obviously I got someone to mix it down. The record, and that's how I launched Silvertooth and Silvertooth Music, the label. That was my first single, and it did really well. I mean, I came back into it thinking with not much expectation, because I know the industry has changed massively since 2010, which is when I left it alone. Now, a lot's happened in that time. A lot's happened to the music business. You know, but obviously, no one buys bloody music anymore for a start, apart from DJs. But general public, they don't buy music; they stream it. That's not worth a toss to anyone, really, unless you're getting millions and millions of streams. So I really didn't know what to expect from it, and I wasn't expecting much from it. But I put a mix package together of the record. So I did a couple of extra mixes. I had the original vocal version, which was 3.5 minutes, which was going to be for radio. Because I'm thinking to myself, well, Six Music play the original version. I've done to coin a better phrase, I've done my interpretation of what Andrew Weatherall might have done, or someone of that ilk. You know, it's Silvertooth, but I've kind of taken all my inspiration from my years in the business and what I like, and done my own version and tried to come up with something that someone like him may have done. I'm not saying he would have done it like that. I'm saying something of that ilk. That's the area that I wanted to move in. That's where I am. That's where my head's at musically. So I did a couple of extra mixes, one of which I called The Dub from Outer Space, which is like a long extended version of that vocal track, stretches out, puts loads of space into the track. The 303 that Gus played is a lovely sounding bass line. It just sounds so fat on the sound system, and it just gets bigger, bigger and bigger and bigger, and I put loads of hypnotic little elements in, snippets, and I just chopped up Jane's vocal into a little loop that's just nagging away at you. And then there's a big payoff at the end where you go into a breakdown, the piano comes in and the vocal comes in. So I thought I made that dub thinking I would like to hear this on the dance floor, standing next to the speakers at a Love from Outer Space. Didn't know if I would, didn't know if Sean would like it, but I thought I'm going to call this the dub from Outer Space. Sean, what do you think of this? And he liked it. He really liked it. He played it relentlessly last year. He said it was one of the most played records of the year. I heard it quite a few times out. I've had loads of comments. So there's two video clips, one of which went viral, of the first Love from Outer Space at Phonox last year. So it was this time last year, February last year it was, and I wasn't at the party, and I'd only finished it at Christmas, and I gave him the finished copy. And that night, it was on a Saturday night, my friend Christian was at the party, and he sent me this video, and I'm sitting watching Match of the Day, man. I got this text on my video. I'm like, what's that? It's like, oh, it's at a club. Oh, fuck, it's my track. And there's people going absolutely bananas in Phonox to my tune. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's playing it. And that was the first ever time that version of that song had been played. And the video clips, I mean, it's in the breakdown when the vocal comes in and people go fucking loony. It's great. I was like, I didn't sleep that night. I was like, Christ, this is incredible. What touch. And he played it all year. He played it relentlessly all year. And it got the original mix got a few plays on radio. So we decided on a release date. I've got a few more mixes done as well, actually. I've got Centre to do a mix, which is Dave Gardner and Dennis White. So they collaborate with Sasha, big Sasha collaborators. They did like a techie progressive thing, took most of the vocals out, really, really high quality mix. Chewy Rubs did his like funky house thing. Pop Up to Get Down is an interesting one. So Pop Up to Get Down is Gus, my pal Gus, and his mate Jamie. They record stuff under the name Pop Up to Get Down. And that's purely kind of New York disco, Francois Kevorkian, Tom Moulton, that pure Balearic sort of disco sound. They did a version, right, which is incredible. And it literally floored me. They didn't remix my track. The only part they used was the vocal. They played everything new and they played it live. So a live bass guitar, live drums, live strings, live this, live that. And they literally got musicians in. What they couldn't record themselves, they got musicians in to record. And it's a live version. That mix. Oh man, I think it's the mix of the package. It's incredible. It had plays from Harvey, Francois Kevorkian, Colleen, Cosmo. Yeah, so but yeah, the record did really well. And Joel said to me, he said, what do you want to achieve with your first record? I said, I don't know. I said, is it going to make any money? He said, probably not. He said, well, what do you want to achieve? I said, I don't know, I just want to get noticed. And I think we did. I think we got noticed. You know, it did really well. It got a couple of plays on Six Music from Chris Hawkins. Got a couple of plays from Don Letts. You know, Don Letts, the Rebel Dread. A good bit of press. It got voted record of the year on Balearic Burger. The band Tonton blog from Japan, he voted it in his top 7 of the year. So, you know, I was like, you know, Joel was right. It didn't make much money, but they generally don't anymore. But you know, it did what it did, and I was really proud of it. I pressed up some double pack vinyls. They look great.
I love the artwork.
Yeah, so that's the guy. The artwork is all done by a guy that Joel uses, and but I mean, we came up with the idea, and I was just thinking, you know, the lyrics are so poignant. You know, shut them down. I mean, that record, Gil Scott Heron wrote that as an anti-protest song. Sorry, as a protest song. It was anti-nuclear. It was in the late 70s. It was all about nuclear power, and he was very much against nuclear power, and it's shut all those power stations down. But for me, and you know, that's one thing. But for me, it was like, I'm seeing all this shit in the news at the moment, horrible stuff, and you know, it's like, shut these fuckers down, man. That's what it was like for me. It was like, you can apply that sentiment to so much stuff. There was police brutality going. Shut them down. There was all the riots. Shut them fuckers down. There was all the politician stuff. There was the Ukraine war. It's like, there's so much shit in the world. Can people just chill the fuck out a little bit? It was horrible, horrible times. But that was my way of going, you know, this is not a very nice world at the moment.
It's,
So yeah,
it's an incredible track. Like I don't play out like I used to. I do my Friday night dance shows for me 4 kids, and they love the track. They really do. You know,
it's ticked a lot of boxes for a lot of people, which is what I wanted to do, and that makes me very happy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what's the goals for Silvertooth for 2025 and the label?
Yeah. So obviously since then I've put out Just Check It, which was my second single, which featured Danny Red, who was on Leftism. So Left Field, another name I've not mentioned yet, but a huge influence on me. Left Field, bloody hell. If you go back to the early '90s, you had Left Field, Orbital, Underworld, the Chems were coming through, and there were probably Prodigy, obviously, but Prodigy a little bit different, doing their sort of rave thing. You had all those like Faithless came through. You had all these dance acts that turned into big acts. For me, Left Field were the ones, and they were the ones that lasted the least amount of time. Although they are Neil Barnes is back again doing his thing, but they didn't have the longevity that the others had because they disappeared they split up and they disappeared. But for me, sonically, as far as making club records, Left Field were the ones. They were the boys for me. And that album, that's the blueprint for dance music.
It's perfection.
It's perfection. Yeah, it's the blueprint. And I actually, funny enough, I actually read an interview many years ago. I think it was in Mixmag, and I'm 99% sure it was with Sasha. And the interviewer said, if an alien came down to Earth, how would you describe dance music? And Sasha said, I'd play them Leftism. And that sums it up. I mean, that album's got everything. So yeah, I made this track called Just Check It. It's just got like a skanking Jamaican vibe to it. It's slow techno essentially. It's not, that's 100 BPM, but it's got this kind of Jamaican ska stabs going on. So back to the Specials almost. It's like that kind of ska. And I wanted a vocalist to be authentic. Listen to Leftism, was like, Danny Red on Inspection, check one. I wonder what he's doing these days. I actually got in touch with L16 first. Now, L16 did what's it called? One of the other ones on Leftism. It escapes me. It's just disappeared from my head. It'll come to me in a minute. Got in touch with L16. He was too busy touring, so he couldn't do it. So I thought, I'm gonna see if I can get with Danny Red. Found him on Bandcamp, emailed him, said, Danny, big fan, blah blah blah. Do you want to do a tune? Like, he emailed me back the next day and said, send it over. And so I sent him the track, and then I got a WhatsApp message from him saying, I'm not going to do the accent because I'm not going to do this justice to myself. But he sent me a WhatsApp voice message saying, yeah, I'm going to do it. This is great. I'll send you some lyrics soon. And a week later, I had the lyrics. So I put that one out. That was great. I've done TJ Hookers, which you mentioned earlier. Signed those boys. What's the plan? So the plan is for me to get as much music out this year as possible, Silvertooth music. And then if anything else comes along from other people, great. I don't need to make a living out of it. I'm working in construction again, doing my thing. I get a bit of spare time in the evenings when my daughter's not keeping me busy to make some music. So I sit here in my front room with my headphones on, making records. I'd like to get to a stage where I get some DJ gigs. I'm not getting many at the moment, and that may or may not happen. But I do miss DJing. I used to enjoy the DJing and the performance and the playing of music. Not so much the politics that comes with it and the bullshit dealing with promoters and managers, whatever you put. I do miss the performance. So the plan is just to release music that I'm proud of, that hopefully connects with people. That's the target. It's not going to connect with everyone. It's certainly, as Andrew Weatherall used to say, music's not for everyone. He used to do a radio show called Music's Not For Everyone. And this music is certainly not for everyone. It's not going to appeal to a lot of people, but then it will appeal to my demographic. So, and that's the target. Yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best, mate. Like I said, what I've heard from you, I'm loving it. It's just my cup of tea. It really is. And it's
Good.
And the remixes as well. I'm a big Dave Gardner fan. Obviously, big Sasha fan as well. So, you know, hearing them remix it takes it to another level of,
Yeah.
I think with the remix package, it's so good because, you know, you've got the chugger, then you've got the more up tempo one. So, you know, in the night you can play all the mixes from start to finish. So
Yeah.
I
I think that thing about covering different bases on remix packages is almost lost in current times. Used to be a massive thing. You know, you go back to when record companies used to put double pack promos out. You would get a mix for every different kind of DJ. Doesn't really happen anymore.
Yeah, they're all kind of samey.
Oh, samey, yeah.
So, well, I wish you all the best for 2025. Please, everybody, go check out Silvertooth at silvertooth.co.uk and also on Bandcamp, silvertooth.bandcamp.com, because, you know, that's where these artists get the money. Yeah, not millions, but at least they'll get some of the money rather than, you know, what especially major labels take, you know, 90% artist money, which is just wrong because they're not the ones making the music, and that's just feels wrong for me. But please, everyone, thank you for listening. Like I always say, open your earbuds. Check out new artists, check out new music. You know, there's loads of music out there that, you know, is brilliant and it's not getting heard. So, you know, find it on whatever platform you find it on, but go look for it. Please, thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, put your notifications on, and stay healthy. Take care of one another, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Daz.